Let's see. Okay.
Two Lost Souls, a novel by J.T. Fisher. Foreword. Most books have a foreword written by someone other than an author. In this case, however, I find it not only appropriate but necessary that I clarify my dedication in memory of two young men, Devin Grimet and Michael Rosenberg. For most readers of my books, you already know that I write about things that have either happened to me or have affected me profoundly. I take tragic or upsetting circumstances and drop them neatly into fictional storylines, allowing readers to identify with relatable characters, see that they overcome the pain and obstacles they face, and go on to live happy, productive lives. There is no more tragic loss than the loss of a child. It does not fit normally or comfortably into the life cycle. Michael and Devin, whose identities are mixed in the story, had a major impact on this author and everyone whose paths they crossed. Just knowing them enriched my life in ways that are hard to describe. Suffice it to say that during their all too short lives, they gave me the inspiration and strength to write about my own struggles with starting a family, my two miscarriages, subsequent infertility, and the emotional upheaval they brought. While it has been a few years since we lost both Michael and Devin, the emptiness of their absence never goes away. May time ease the pain of those family members and friends they left behind, and may they both rest in peace. Chapter 1. Did you hear that? Sophie sat up in bed suddenly, with her heart throbbing in her throat and unable to take a breath. Her eyes darted around the room. The sheer cream curtains blew slightly in the damp midnight breeze, but that wasn't the only thing different. Alex snored softly. I hate to wake him, but I'm sure I heard a voice calling me this time. Honey, are you asleep? Did you hear that? Sophie wasn't really trying to wake him, but she also didn't want to be alone. She gently tossed the lightweight summer covers off her torso and slid her feet out. I'm just going to go upstairs and watch some television until I get drowsy enough to fall back to sleep. Climbing out of bed, she was less than graceful. Standing up, she bumped into the side of the bed, still woozy from the sedative she had taken. Where are you going? Alex rolled over with one eye open. Did it happen again, Sophie? Are you okay? I just can't sleep, and I don't want to keep you up. That's not the truth, is it, Soph? Alex pulled himself up to a sitting position. You had that nightmare again, didn't you? Sophie burst into tears. I heard a voice this time, and the window was blowing the curtains. Slumping back onto the bed, Sophie sobbed. I heard the baby calling me. It was so weird, telling me not to worry. Her voice faltered. The baby's still with me, Alex. Only this time he's talking to me. She gasped for breath. I can't seem to let go of this child. Sophie had been adrift in her own pain since the miscarriage, caught between wondering why it happened and trying to figure out if she had done something to cause it. These dreams, hearing voices, and the guilt had sent her over the edge. Soph, do you want me to fix you some herbal tea or maybe some warm milk? Alex had run out of ideas. Sophie was stuck. She was adamant that she didn't need to see a therapist, but since the miscarriage, she hadn't returned to her job and had no interest in any of her hobbies or any of the things that gave her joy. She hadn't even seen friends or even her sister. I could make you a milkshake if you want. No, it's okay. You go back to sleep, she sniffed. You have to get up for work in the morning. Alex had no other options left to him. He couldn't convince her to go back to work. He'd given up trying to get her to talk to anyone. Neither of their parents could get through to her either. It had been 3 months since the miscarriage, and Sophie was frozen in time as if it had happened yesterday. Yeah, I do. Alex could feel himself ready to explode. He had been holding back himself for weeks, but had no more emotional strength left. So, when do you think you'll be going back to work? Getting yourself busy with something might help. Sophie stopped cold, astonished. She had no words. She simply stared blankly at Alex, her lips separated and dry. Finally, she found the ability to form her thoughts in response. Are you that much of a despicable monster? I lost a child here. Do you really expect me to go back to work as if nothing happened? Come on, Sophie, you know better. Besides, it was my child, too. The words coming out of Alex's mouth seemed hollow. They've had this conversation several times. It's been 3 months now. It's time to move forward. The doctor told us that it wasn't that uncommon. He said a lot of women have miscarriages, especially with their first pregnancy. Well, I'm not a lot of other women. I'm your wife. Sophie sat down on the edge of the bed. Nobody can take away my feelings, and I'm not ready to go back to work, damn it. Okay, okay. Alex laid back on his pillow. If there's nothing I can do to make you feel better, then I'm going back to sleep. I still need to get up and earn a living. He rolled over, turned his back to her, released a tortured sigh, and became silent. Sophie got up from the bed, snatched her pillow, and tried to make a dramatic exit from the bedroom, but her audience of one was paying no attention. He's right. There's nothing I can do to bring the baby back. I'd be halfway through my 4th month by now and out of the first trimester. The morning sickness would be over. I'd be able to tell everyone that I was with child. Look at me. I'm still doing it. I'm still marking me time as if it wasn't true. And I can't wish it away. Sophie made her way up the stairs to the loft where they kept the bigger television. She made herself comfortable on the daybed and turned on a late movie. She tried to wrap her mind up in silly B film, but her mind kept wandering back to what Alex had said. After a while, her eyelids began to betray her mind, and she felt herself dozing in and out of the movie. Fighting sleep, she grabbed a note pen and a pad from the desk top next to where she was lying and began to jot down a few thoughts. She decided she wanted to go back to school to get a master's degree and or a doctorate. She would work part-time too to help supplement the household income. She must remember to get coffee at the grocery. She wants to borrow her sister's sewing machine. Her eyelids were drooping now, and in the middle of her list, she fell off to sleep. Chapter 2. It's okay with me if you want a divorce. Sophie whimpered as she turned back to her husband. You should marry someone who can give you children. Her anguish was palpable. Still in shock from her second miscarriage and reeling from the wild rush of hormones coursing through her body, Alex was hesitant to respond for fear of saying just the wrong thing at the wrong time. He had had a bad habit of reacting too quickly to Sophie's emotional appeals. But this time was different. This time it was about him too. Don't be ridiculous. I married you, not your uterus. Please, now's not the time to try to be funny. Sophie was crying inconsolably. Her whole body was rigid and racked with the kind of pain that came from years of trying to start a family unsuccessfully after a lifetime of dreaming of raising a slew of kids. Sophie had never had designs on becoming a brain surgeon or a Supreme Court justice, a Nobel Prize winner in science, or a world-class athlete. She was, at her very core, a mommy. She had an amazing example in her own mother. Sure, she had talents and interests. Sophie wasn't one-dimensional. When she was young, she wanted to be an actor or a singer. She wanted to write and perform or be a lawyer. She thought at one time she would have made a wonderful pediatrician. Her earliest memory was wanting to be a firefighter, but her brothers dissuaded her from that dream because that's only for boys. Her sister went on to become a family therapist. That was never something to which Sophie aspired. She was much too empathetic for something like that, imagining herself taking on everyone else's problems as her own. As she got older, Sophie knew in her heart that the main thing she wanted, her one greatest desire, was to be a mom. She knew she would be great at it, and she knew she wanted 3 or 4 kids. Sometimes she wondered why she wanted this so badly, having had so many issues with her own upbringing and her own parents. It wasn't that they abused her physically or anything, they just weren't very present in her life. It may have been her perception, or it may have been that she was the youngest of 5 children, and there just wasn't enough time. But here she was, desperate, having suffered yet another miscarriage. This time, she had made it through the first trimester. She was at 13 weeks along and just spent the previous 3 days on the phone calling everyone to tell them. She had learned her lesson the last time when she was only 7 weeks along and told everyone, and then promptly miscarried the next day, despite her doctor's recommendation to wait a few weeks. Come on, honey. Alex was beside himself. It'll be okay. Let's wait to see what Dr. Glassman has to say before you make any rash decisions or do something you might regret. Oh, stop. It isn't your body that's rejecting the pregnancy. It isn't you who's going through this. I beg your pardon. Again, it was my baby, too. Your hormones aren't bouncing all over the place. You're not experiencing cramps and bleeding. And now, since they overturned Roe v. Wade, I'm not sure Dr. Glassman will be able to do a D&C without them investigating to see if it was an abortion or not. Don't be silly, Alex protested. Are you not paying attention? That's what your Republicans are causing all over the country. It's disgusting. That's not us. Alex had no desire to turn this into another political fight. It may not be us, Alex, but if you don't pull your head out of the sand, you're going to be surprised at what happens to me and Dr. Glassman in the next few weeks. The paperwork, the sworn statements, the testimony. Remember, we live in a red state with a red governor, and this is about to get ugly, and you better choose the right side. I mean, the correct side. We disagree about a lot of issues, but not this one. That's what I mean. You should leave me and find a girl who can bear your children for you. She paused. Maybe she'll think like you politically, too. Sophie started to cry again. Just go home. Call whomever you need to call. I'll clear my dad can't tear himself away from his desk and come down here. I'll just go to sleep. Can I bring you anything from home? I'm going home and I'm going to shower and take a nap. I'll be back in a couple hours, okay? Fine. Sophie turned her back to Alex again, not allowing him to give her even a goodbye kiss, much less the hug. Sophie had a bad habit of turning away from people who were closest to her when she needed them the most. But just as Alex left, the room nurse entered. He was able to warn her. Be careful. She's on the warpath. Thanks for the heads up, the nurse smiled. Okay, Sophie, time for vitals. Again, Sophie threw herself back on the bed, kicked her feet under the covers. I'm still bleeding pretty heavily. Just keep an eye on you, that's all. The nurse who had spent her whole career in labor and delivery slipped the blood pressure cuff on Sophie's arm. What's going through that head of yours? You look like you're in a whole different world. What do you think? I just had another miscarriage. I can't have kids. Well, that's not necessarily so. She paused for a second and then took Sophie's wrist in her hand to take her pulse. I had 3 miscarriages before I had my twins, and another after I had my daughter. Really? Sophie was surprised. No, I'm not lying to you and just to make you feel better. The nurse had stopped and stared straight into Sophie's eyes. Of course, really. I know you need to go through the appropriate grief, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You suffered a loss, and whatever you need to do to come to terms with it is your business and nobody else's. The nurse gently laid Sophie's wrist back down beside her. You need to calm down and recognize that people are going to say a lot of stupid things to you in the next few weeks. Ignore them. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Sophie began to weep once more, although this time it felt different to her. This time she felt a profound sense of relief. You know, this might sound really strange, but I always believed that once a child is conceived, God gives that child a soul. The nurse smiled, nodding her head. I feel like I let God down by not being able to carry those two children, those two souls to term. I take those miscarriages so personally, like they were my fault, or that God is punishing me, or something stupid like that. And I wonder what happened to those souls. Did God take them back to heaven? Whew, I'm not really that spiritual, the nurse whispered, so I can't really answer that question. I do know that some people believe that God doesn't give the baby a soul until he or she takes their first breath. Sophie's nurse was beginning to squirm. I mean, I believe in God and all, and I don't think about that stuff that deeply. I just go to church occasionally, celebrate the holidays, and live a clean life. Sophie was now clearly making the nurse uncomfortable. I have a couple of other patients to see. We'll talk some more later. Get a little rest. Sophie shimmied down into the bed and tried to go to sleep. She was thankful for the private room in the maternity wing. She didn't think she would be able to stand it if she had to share a room with a new mother learning how to nurse her new baby. She had known Dr. Glassman since she was 16. He had a coarse bedside manner and was rough around the edges when dealing with her because he knew he could get away with it. But in this case, he also knew her heart couldn't take any more pain. Sophie kept opening her eyes because of random thoughts that were so intense they broke her focus on relaxation. Things like, will she ever be able to have a baby? Why can't her father visit her? Or will Alex end up leaving her? What will happen to those two lost souls? And even mundane things like, what time is Dr. Glassman coming? And what are they serving for dinner? Can she order a pizza from Steve's instead? Just as Sophie dozed off, the phone rang. Phew, I really wanted that nap. I hope whoever it is has something important to say. She reached over to the nightstand and grabbed the receiver before it rang again. Hello? Hi, honey, it's Mom. Oh, hi, Mom. Sophie was relieved to hear her mother's voice on the other end of the line. I'm so sorry, sweetie. Do you need me to come home? Joyce was in Philadelphia visiting Sophie's sister. I can get her on the next plane. I'm due home in 2 days, but I can change my flight if you want. No, Mom, it's not necessary. They're keeping me overnight for some unknown reason, but I'm okay. Sophie really wanted to tell her to come, especially since her father hadn't bothered to try and come to the 3 miles to the hospital to see her, but she had to be tough. I'll be discharged in the morning. Okay, baby, as long as you're okay. I'll be okay. Alex is here. We're fine. Okay, I'll see you in 2 days then. I love you, Sophie. Love you too, Mom. Sophie dropped the receiver back in its cradle. She never felt as tough as she let on. Her single room came in handy. She rolled back over and screamed into her pillow. Why again? That's it.
Okay.